Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third in our 2023 webinar series on electrifying commercial fleets. I'm Andrew Elkin, Managing Editor of Electric Autonomy's EV Fleets Knowledge Hub, and I'm delighted to introduce this episode. It's called Understanding the Total Cost of Ownership for EV Fleets, and it is sponsored by Jim Pattison Lease. We're grateful to the team at Jim Pattison Lease for their participation and support of this discussion. I'd like to now acknowledge that our work at Electric Autonomy is conducted from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Before we get into today's topic, just want to say a few words about Electric Autonomy's work on the EV Fleets Knowledge Hub. If you don't already know it, this is an online course for fleet pros who want to take the first steps toward electrifying their fleets. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to check it out after today's session at evfleets.ca. The good news is that signing up is completely free. Today, we look at an essential factor in any fleet's transition to electric vehicles. What is it going to cost? Before you place any orders for EVs or charging infrastructure, you'll want to know what your fleet electrification plans mean for your organization's bottom line. And we're lucky today to have a very knowledgeable expert who will help us to understand the range and scope of the expenses that go into such a project. I'm delighted to introduce you now to our presenter. He is Timothy Tsao, Product Manager at Jim Pattison Lease. Welcome, Timothy.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, everybody.
Timothy has a presentation that takes us deep into the lifecycle cost calculations for the kind of fleet vehicles leased by Jim Pattison Lease. So, Timothy, please take it away.
Thanks, Andrew. All right, as Andrew mentioned, I'm the product manager at Jim Pattison Lease. I have nearly 5 years in the fleet industry, and the fleet programs that I specialize in are telematics, reporting, big data applications, and electrification, which includes EV transition consulting. So on the agenda today, we're going to talk about a few things, starting with the complete approach to fleet sustainability, looking at some EV adoption trends from a fleet perspective, some qualitative and quantitative considerations for electrification, tying in all those components into a total cost of ownership analysis, and some conclusions and Q&A. So founded in 1961 and part of the Jim Pattison Group, which is Canada's largest privately owned company with sales over 15 billion in 2022, my organization, Jim Pattison Lease, is Canada's leader in customized fleet management. We have 12 locations across Canada and the US, and we service fleets of all makes and models, but we specialize in light-duty fleets. In terms of the EV space, we offer complete services from leasing, remarketing, consulting for electrification, strategic planning, charging station distribution, installation, as well as the ability to provide custom reporting solutions for all sorts of needs. So our EV team looks at a number of factors during our initial conversations with clients looking to go electric. We first review with them their corporate objectives. Maybe it's finance targets, maybe it's reducing operational costs, ESG motivations, or wanting to improve their corporate image. For example, there was a pest control fleet client who wanted to proudly display their commitment to environmental sustainability by switching their chemical products to greener and environmentally friendly pesticides. So they put on decals on their trucks that proudly proclaimed the sustainable methods that they use for extermination. But then they realized that they could be going a step further by switching their gas trucks that they're putting these decals on to hybrid trucks like the Maverick hybrid, which would further cement their corporate image's dedication to reducing emissions, but also actually make an impact beyond the optics. So we like to work with customers such as this one in all stages of their ESG journey to help them realize their current and future goals. For customers who want to take a quantified approach, we recommend a vehicle electrification analysis, which is our quantitative assessment of operations and how that factors into a multi-year vehicle cycle projection. So this includes an infrastructure plan on how to charge, where to charge, when to charge, and how many chargers will they possibly need today and in the future. A total cost of ownership approach that can be applied to help identify vehicle operating costs, lease costs, residual costs, can then help the customer make a calculated decision. And finally, since EVs are so rich with data and are generally telematics ready, it's important for the customer to understand what sort of reporting and analytics are available to the fleet managers after electrification to help optimize their fleet, like route optimization with charge planning, bypassing peak utility demands, driver reimbursement for not only home charging, but off-network charging as well. Electric Autonomy publishes a quarterly article on useful stats on new zero-emission vehicle registrations. So I won't talk too much about that, but I will share some observations from our perspective as a fleet management company that operates an in-house electrification and sustainability program. So from our perspective, we've seen exponential, measurable interest and growth in sectors of customers serviced by JPL. Customers are needing more guidance from an experienced FMC in how to approach electrification. So our electrification projects have seen the most uptake in the automotive fleets, construction, engineering, restoration, HVAC, and sales. We've also seen a 94% year-over-year growth in our EV lease portfolio. For a fleet customer, we usually see adoption starting with 1 or 2 managers or executives getting an EV, and these are usually the people who are the key members who will make important steering decisions for the business in the near future regarding electrification. Fleets who begin electrification by phasing out ICE vehicles usually start with no more than 5 to 10% of their entire fleet becoming hybrids or electrified. And most analyses that we've done showcase a break-even point of 3 to 4 years with the current cost of electric vehicles and charging infrastructure as the main barriers, financial barriers to entry. To dive into our vehicle electrification analysis piece, the first thing to consider operationally is vehicle function suitability. Which electric or hybrid vehicles can continue to service the current operations without impacting service levels, vehicle downtime, or driver learning curves? Will the electric range of the vehicles be suitable to the current operations, which will be affected by payload and towing by up to 55% reduction of range at 100% capacity, or by up to 60% reduction in range in minus 20 Celsius or lower temperatures? We use real-world case studies backed by telematics to help give clients a good idea of range reduction based on what climates they operate in and what payload they normally have. Battery degradation is another question. It's not a well-documented stat due to the novelty of EVs. But for example, Tesla, who has been around in mass production for 11, 12 years, has documented only 12% of battery degradation after 360,000 kms. Tailpipe CO2 reduction can also be quantified by fuel type or engine type, but it's roughly 2.5 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions per liter of fuel. And a fun fact, it takes about 47 fully grown trees to offset 1 ton of CO2 in the atmosphere over the course of a year's time. Next, we dive into financial considerations. We can calculate how much a fleet will be saving on electricity versus fuel. This greatly depends on the fuel prices and utility costs in the region you're operating in, as well as if you're charging outside of peak hours using a load management device or a smart charger. But typically, the more you drive, the bigger discrepancy in your propulsion cost between fuel and electricity by anywhere up to 80%. Maintenance is another area where savings are realized versus ICE vehicles. Since there are roughly just 1% of moving parts in an electric vehicle versus its ICE counterpart, there are much fewer things to service. If you look on the owner's manual for some EVs, the recommended service items are rotating tires because EVs still have tires, replacing your air filter, but these things that need replacing are on the magnitude of years, not half years or every 6,000 kilometers like oil changes. The instant EV acceleration does take a toll on tires, as does the heavy battery and the natures of EVs being quite heavy. So tires do get worn down substantially if driven harshly. And brakes are used much less than regular ICE vehicles, since the heavy regenerative braking takes most of the kinetic energy from slowing down into electricity to recharge the battery. So the pads and discs won't be subjected to as much wear and tear nearly as much as an ICE vehicle. And finally, needless to say, any FMC that you work with should be able to factor in federal and provincial EV rebates into their leasing costs, as well as help with a remarketing and replacement strategy that works specifically for your needs. It's important to have regional remarketing offices across the country, as their regional needs and residuals are different. For example, in BC, electric vehicle residuals are very different than those in Alberta due to a number of factors like climate and what incentives are available. And as some of you may know, JPL offers both open and closed-end leases, which is an important feature as we can take on the sometimes unknown residual risk on an EV. Moving on to the charging infrastructure part, with determining a strategy for charging infrastructure, the first thing to consider is home charging versus on-route charging versus office charging, and which sites to prioritize and how many chargers to allocate to each type. Most clients start with home charging for front-facing garages that aren't multi-unit complexes and may put a charger or two for their office site. This leads into real estate feasibility. The labor cost for installation goes up dramatically as the installation site becomes farther from the electrical panel, or if concrete coring is required, or if the building needs electrical upgrades. There are some ever-changing incentives for charging infrastructure that your FMC can advise on that individuals or businesses can take advantage of. Part of the quote process will include sending photos to the electrician or the laborer, or an on-site visit from the electrician to provide a more accurate quotation. And depending on the current state of your electrical setup, there may be load management devices required to help switch between things that draw a lot of power, such as turning off the power to a dryer or AC unit when you need to charge. And all of these things will add to the cost of the charging infrastructure and can be advised on by the electrician. So in summary, what we've discussed today are the considerations that should go into a total cost of ownership analysis, which is the end goal of helping a business determine the cost of electrification. It starts with the lease cycle and vehicle suitability, as well as any incentives and estimated resale value of the vehicles. It factors in the cost of the most optimized charging infrastructure plan. It factors in the operational costs for electricity and maintenance. It factors in the reduction of valuable fleet downtime in service, maintenance, and breakdowns. That's much less in electric fleets. That is, if you planned your charging stops carefully. And I know there was a question that was submitted during registration on insurance. Is there a big difference on premiums to insure ICE versus electric? The answer is no. There isn't much of a noticeable difference insuring an EV or its ICE counterpart. EVs are more modern and tend to have things like autonomous braking systems or ADAS. which tend to lead to discounts in insurance. But other than that, there aren't any major deciding factors for difference in insurance premiums, which are mostly impacted by claims history, postal code, where it's parked, age, status, things like that. And finally, the cost of the software, which is crucial to managing an electrical fleet. Reporting availability and telematics tracking should be factored in, as well as there's an administrative and cloud connectivity costs to these services. So hopefully this has been a helpful dive into some insights into the world of fleet electrification. I'm happy to chat more and connect offline. But I understand we have some questions coming in from the pre-registration and the Q&A.
Amazing. Thank you, Timothy. It's great to see you get so deep into the details, because the details of the fleet transition are so important. We did save some time for audience questions, and we had a lot of those via the registration form and a few coming in through the Q&A chat. Tim, first question for you is, how do you select a solution provider for the required fleet EV charging infrastructure?
Thanks, Andrew. That's a good question. I think that was one of the previous submitted questions here. So the key for selecting a good solution provider when you're wanting to look at what is the best platform to choose is to look at which provider has solved the majority of the problems that plague the current industry right now. And there are three main problems that plague the current charging infrastructure space. The first one is VIN identification, which is a lack of ability for fleet managers to see which vehicles are being charged at the point of charging. So right now it's limited to some level 3, which are very expensive charging stations that can detect the VIN of the vehicle. Most level 2s do not. And Tesla's supercharge network is the only one that is fully fleshed out to show which VIN is being charged at the moment. So this is a regulation problem that will likely go away with time as different standards are coming together. But that is the first problem right now. The second problem is cross-platform payment. So there are different platforms in North America competing for market share, and sometimes they have roaming agreements, sometimes they don't with each other, and this causes a driver, if they're charging on the road, to have to keep multiple apps on their phone to be able to charge at what's most convenient for them. In major cities, this isn't really a problem. You can find different networks pretty close to each other. But if you're on the open road or in a small town, you might have only access to one network, and you have to use that network's payment system. So cross-platform payment, again, is a problem that can be solved with standardization and more roaming agreements between the network operators out there. So it's best to choose regionally which network will supply your drivers with on-route charging the best in the regions that you're going to be operating in. The three standards, as you may have seen in the news recently, is that ChargePoint and Flow, GM, Ford have all agreed to adopt Tesla's NACS, North American Charging Standard, in future vehicles, which effectively is phasing out a couple of other standards in North America. CHAdeMO, which is a Japanese standard that was used for the Nissan Leaf, and then the CCS, which was, I think, started from a German standard and is here and is widely adopted. But the major manufacturers, as I mentioned there, are choosing to go with the NACS, so it's here to stay, and it seems like there will become more unification and less barrier to those problems that I mentioned earlier.
Thanks. That's a thorough answer. But I have a follow-up for you, which is, in terms of what Jim Pattison Lease does, do you package charging as a service into your offer, or do your customers deal with a secondary vendor for their charging?
Yeah, so we have a partnership with ChargePoint, and we've selected them for a number of reasons that address the problems that we mentioned before. The problems that I mentioned are plaguing everybody, so it's not a solution that any network vendor can solve in full. But our experience is a turnkey experience, where if customers want to come with us for leasing vehicles to installing chargers, we do that from cradle to grave, from the recommendation of vehicles all the way to analysis of operational needs, to procuring the vehicles, to sending out the actual installers, doing the installations for the charging stations, and setting you up with reporting. So end-to-end turnkey solution.
Okay, fabulous. The next question: how do you account for the potential costs of upgrading or expanding charging infrastructure to accommodate EV fleets, and what's the impact on total cost of ownership?
Good question. So this question, the way I'll answer it is in short, a very thorough and unrushed planning analysis during the consultation phase. So this is why I mentioned earlier, it's important for us to understand the customer's goals. Do they have a target in 10 years from now where they need to be 100% or 80% electrified? Are they doing this because an executive thought it would be trendy to go EV? Do they have emissions goals? All these goals will impact the outlook of the next few years of the client, and it will dramatically impact how we approach the analysis. So the way to prepare for the potential expanding cost of charging infrastructure is to do this analysis thoroughly, to understand what is the projected switchover rate for the next few years of ICE to EVs or plug-in hybrids, and what that tells us will give us enough data to recommend the optimal charging infrastructure that can be quote unquote future-proof for the next few years. A lot of it is modular, so there could be space left, or physically or hypothetically, for charging stations with potential to upgrade, or it might be a policy change down the road where perhaps all the vehicles start by charging at the office, but eventually we move those into the homes of drivers that need it. So it's important to understand the customer's mandate, the timeline, and doing the full analysis upfront, using as much data that we can get in terms of the current operations, or even better through telematics, because then the customer doesn't have to give us a lot of effort to tell us how they drive. We can just look at their telematics history.
Okay. So the more deliberate you are in your process, the more you can avoid those those unforeseen cost increases down the line.
That's right.
So just bringing another live question in, does that apply to fleets of all sizes? And is there, is there an ideal size of transition to start with? For example, 8 to 10 vehicles, or can it be much larger?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as I mentioned earlier, from the pool of customers we have assisted with their electrification journey, the typical portion of their fleet that begins with electrification is usually no more than 10%, between 5 and 10% usually. And if the fleet is a smaller fleet, it usually starts with one executive starting with an EV and changing their commuting behavior with an EV, and then they become the champions within their company to talk about what that experience is like. So it's important to look at, again, regionally, from the base of operations, which vehicles are suitable to replace with an EV. Not all vehicles will. If you have larger fleets that are traveling cross country, that's typically not the place to start. But that's where we see a lot of intercity use cases and routes being replaced with EVs, like sales fleets, like HVAC fleets, small last mile delivery fleets, which would be a perfect example of hub and spoke type of base versus operations, where it's predictable. They come back to a central location to sleep. The vehicles go to sleep at night, which makes for an optimal charging type of situation.
Okay. Thanks. Someone wrote that they're particularly interested on the charging side when fleets are away from home base. Is that factored into the overall lease package through your Charge Hub partnership?
Charge Point partnership. Yeah, that's okay. So yes. So depending on the type of charging that they need, if it's in this case on the go, it's important that we provide the customer with a way to have visibility when they're using on-the-go charging that's off-network or using a different provider or for charging entirely. We have a card system, a payment card system that's similar to a fleet card, where we can load it onto the app, and the driver can more or less use the same app across Canada for the majority of charging stations and their partners, roaming partners. And then all the payments that go through that app is tracked on a fleet manager administrative dashboard, so that they have visibility for tracking and monitoring where vehicles are getting charged, etc.
Yeah. We are getting through these questions quickly. The next one is, does your analysis take into account the potential costs of battery replacements or upgrades? How common are these replacements, and how do they impact the total cost of ownership?
Good question. Yeah. So battery degradation is not something that's is not something that's super well documented throughout generations of vehicles. It's well documented within the current generations of EVs. So we rely on a lot of data to help us answer this question. A major telematics firm looked at, I think it was 6,300 fleet and consumer EVs over a combined 2 million days of driving data, 1 or 2 million, it's on that magnitude, days of driving data. And it showed that in over 6 years of ownership, on average, so driving nearly 120,000 kilometers, 6 years of ownership, the state of health of the battery was at about 87% across all those vehicles. So to put that into perspective, you're driving an EV daily for 6 years, you racked up 120,000 kilometers on the odometer, your battery still charges to 87% of the range, the max range in the optimal climate situation from the day versus the day that you got it. I would consider that to be pretty impressive for battery technology compared to how our phones battery degrade. And hopefully that stat that we use here is enough to help put aside fears on battery longevity. So despite, on the other side, we can talk about manufacturer warranty. So despite being in a fairly new space, only Tesla and Nissan has really been along for a decade or more, but they both offer 8 years, 160,000 kilometers as their warranty, which is actually a federally mandated minimum. Some automakers today extend this warranty to the lifetime of the vehicle. So it's not really expected that you will need to replace the battery for these types of vehicles. Is the conclusion to how to answer this question.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Again, it's something which is still very hard to answer because EVs are relatively new, but it's nice to know that the evidence is pointing in that direction, especially if you're already operating or owning EVs of your own. I have a question about does Jim Pattison Lease package a particular EV analytics platform? What type of analytics are provided on EVs for a fleet, and what are the capabilities of it? Is there yeah, can you address that?
Yes, yeah, of course. So I touched briefly on this, but not in detail here. So we offer an in-house electrification and sustainability program where we start with the consumer at any stage of their electrification journey. We talk to them about their consulting, about their goals, and what are they looking, when are they looking to have a plan in place, when are they looking to implement. We do a vehicle analysis where we look at their operations and required driving ranges, their current expected downtime. We look at their budgets for leasing, procurement. We look at their needs for charging on the go with the payment card and maintenance. We also have a maintenance card as well. We can send out the electrician and laborers throughout our distribution partnership with ChargePoint, who will then give them an accurate quote on their charging stations, no matter if it's at the office or if it's at their home. We can execute on that installation and deliver the vehicles, apply all the rebates that are required, and maximize the cost for the customer. And then we help the customer throughout their first few months or so of electrification operation, which is the reporting piece, the load management piece, the managing peak demand charges, driver reimbursement, all those reports. So from beginning, any stage, all the way to the end, to operating electric, we have and we can assist clients throughout this journey.
That's great to know. We have another question about charging infrastructure and that kind of setup. How do you estimate? Well, you already answered part of this. How do you estimate the cost of charging infrastructure? Do you always require an on-site visit?
Good question. Yeah. So not always. It really depends on the complexity of the dwelling. So front-facing garages are the absolute easiest. Usually there's an electrical panel in there. We just need a picture of the panel to see if there's space on the panel, see how much room there is around the panel to maybe we need to drill into the wall, and how far your vehicle is going to be parked from that panel. If that panel is right at the garage door, that is the lowest cost installation you'll ever see. The deeper that panel is, the longer we have to run wire, the more increase into the cost. If you have a apartment building that has P1, P2, P3, P4 into the ground, now we're talking a different type of installation. Those charging stations will, if they're public, they will require internet connection. So we'll need to see what way can we get perhaps Wi-Fi or a cellular signal, which would be difficult in a P4 situation down there. So that adds to the complexity. For an office depot type of charging, it's usually allocating 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 parking spots to have a dual-sided charger for that can take care of 2 charging parking spots at a time, and that usually may require some concrete coring, which is a different cost in itself, and depending on the length of wire needed to run that station all the way to the electrical panel of that office, that will change the cost as well. So that's all the labor piece. For a front facing garage home, that usually doesn't require someone to come and do a quote. But for anything else that's more office based or depot based, usually we will we will highly recommend that we have an electrician come take a look at the project. And that's just the labor piece. The hardware piece will vary as well. So level 2 chargers work really well for an overnight charging routine, 6 to 8 hours. Your car is full, ready for the next day. Level 3 is magnitudes more expensive, and but also it's at the speed of a Tesla supercharger. So depending on how fast you need to rotate out vehicles, or how fast you need to charge before they get back on the road, that's what the different types of applications are for, and that's all before considering if your current electrical panel can handle that type of load. So those are the different things that sort of go into the installer's checklist when they go through a quote for the customer.
Right. And that's great. And it makes sense. The more complex your situation or your installation is going to be, the more necessary it would be to have someone actually come on site and see what's going on there. Okay. We've had, so there's a couple of questions about let me see, I'm just going to pick one. You talked briefly about the challenges with charging setup and VIN. This is probably something, well, anyways, I'll throw this at you in case you have an answer. Will NACS bring VIN identification into the charging picture more, I guess, a more standardized approach to VIN identification in the charging picture? Is it too early to say?
It's too early to say, but hopeful, because again, the history of NACS is a Tesla created standard back in 2012 or so. And Tesla is the only one that has been able to 100% of the time locate and identify the VIN of the vehicle being charged. Now that's a benefit because it's a closed system, and up till now they only allowed charging of Tesla vehicles. In Europe, they started allowing Volvo vehicles to charge, and soon, as you may have seen on the news, Ford and GM will be able to use it here as well. So I don't have a crystal ball, but it is hopeful that the standard that has seemingly won the charging standard battle is also from the creator that has standardized VIN identification. So until then, the only way for seamless VIN identification is to use aftermarket telematics.
Okay, great. Thanks for fielding that one. Here's another one, and we had some questions that relate to this in terms of resale values. So I don't know if that's something can fit into your answer or if that's a secondary question, but how do you deal with the unknown depreciation as supply constraints lift and used EV prices could drop? How does electric vehicle depreciation compare with that of ICE vehicles?
Okay, it's a loaded question. Lots of things here. So in short, how do we deal with the unknown depreciation ICE vehicles? Is that we depreciate them hard upfront. And I'll sort of explain that. So our expert JPL remarketing team has seen pretty dramatic market swings in the past 6 months due to a number of factors. So some of the manufacturers have changed their pricing 5 times since December for the same vehicle. A lot more EVs have come out in the past few months with shorter wait times. Gone are sort of the days of waiting a year and a half or unknown to place an order. You can get them, a lot of EVs, in a few months now. And a lot more EVs have also been promised for near future release dates that have longer range, which is drawing people to wait for those vehicles and maybe not buy current available EVs. So all these price changes, and not to mention the occasional changing incentive from the government, mean that a lot of older stock cannot get sold, and they're just chilling on the lot because sales managers don't want to take a loss on an older EV. The tech is changing rapidly, and the battery cost today is roughly 25 to 30% of the entire vehicle itself. So as the battery gets better, that's going to impact the MSRP of the vehicle very dramatically. It's kind of like trying to sell an iPhone 8 in 2023. It's fairly smooth, it's good build, it works beautifully, but the battery life is just questionable compared to an iPhone 14. And no one has really had a lot of experience cycling through generations of EVs. So as I mentioned, our policy is to depreciate the lease hard upfront to account for the worst case scenario, especially when we've seen EV prices have plunged 20 to 25% in the last half year, just from auction data. Now, in the meantime, hybrids have seen the opposite story. You can get easily 20, 30% more than fair market value if you have a hybrid for sale, as they're generally considered the safe option with no range anxiety issues and are fuel efficient and have less maintenance than ICE vehicles. It's sort of a safe option to choose if you don't have the charging infrastructure or want to get into the electrified vehicle world, but not all the way to start. And the last thing I'll say is that values, resale values, can vary greatly from region to region, as I mentioned earlier. So it's important to make sure that the person that you're dealing with in remarketing has regional offices or at least regional visibility into the market that you're trying to remarket this type of vehicle.
Okay. That's a thoughtful and thorough answer for something which is still developing. So much appreciated, Timothy. And with that, we're at the end of the Q&A segment of today's session. We went a little longer in order to accommodate a few more questions. Timothy, I just want to thank you again for sharing all your insights and knowledge with the audience today. It's been really interesting to see how the costs of EVs stack up for businesses who are looking to make this change on their fleets. Thanks to you as well, the audience, for the many great questions that took the conversation even further. And thanks once again to Jim Pattison Lease, not just for bringing this expertise forward today, but also sponsoring this event and for being a great partner in the evfleets.ca Knowledge Hub. A final note for today for anyone beginning their fleet electrification journey, Electra Utilities, a delivery organization for the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program, or ZEVIP, is now accepting applications from organizations that need help to access available funding. If you're looking to install EV charging infrastructure as part of your EV plan, check out electricutilities.com for information on how to apply. When it comes to fleet electrification, Electric Autonomy has got you covered. We'll be announcing more webinars in the coming months, so keep your eye on Electric Autonomy's newsletter. Thanks again to all for being with us, and have a great day.